Title: Surviving America's Hardest Prisons. Real stories they don't want you to see. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. The walls that don't forgive. Inside America's hardest prisons. Real stories they don't want you to see. When most people picture a prison, they imagine concrete walls, metal doors, uniforms, and silence. But inside America's hardest correctional facilities, the ones designed to hold the country's most violent and unmanageable offenders, life operates under a completely different rhythm. These prisons are ecosystems built on fear, routine, and survival. And for the men and women trapped inside, every hour can feel like walking a tightrope between sanity and collapse. The story begins in facilities scattered across the United States, from the freezing plains of South Dakota to the old stone penitentiaries of Indiana, the towering urban prisons of Georgia, and the rural supermax units buried deep in the American Midwest. These places share a single reputation. Once you go in, time seems to stop. The days blend together, the outside world fades, and the hardest battles become the ones happening inside the human mind. To understand why these prisons are considered some of the toughest in America, you must start with the environment itself. Many of these facilities were built decades ago and have barely changed since. The walls sweat in the summer and freeze in the winter. Paint peels from aging cinder blocks. The air carries a mix of bleach, metal, dust, sweat, and something harder to describe, an emotional heaviness from decades of despair soaked into the foundation. At one Midwestern maximum security prison, officers described the atmosphere as permanent tension. Inmates never know when a fight will erupt, and staff never know which shift will end in a stabbing, an overdose, or an assault. There's a reason many correctional officers don't last long. The stress level rivals that of emergency rooms and military combat zones. But the most extreme conditions are found inside segregation units, known as the whole, restricted housing, or supermax isolation. These are the places designed for inmates considered too violent, unpredictable, or influential to keep in the general population. In isolation, prisoners often spend 23 hours a day in a cell the size of a walk-in closet. The cell might include a steel bunk, a toilet, a sink, and a slit-like window that barely lets in sunlight. Meals slide through a slot in the door. Conversations become echoes in the hallway. Some inmates go weeks without touching another human being. Others spend years. Former inmates who survived supermax conditions describe a psychological collapse that happens slowly, then all at once. Some begin talking to themselves. Some pace endlessly, wearing grooves into the concrete floor. Others scream throughout the night because the silence makes their thoughts too loud to handle. Studies by the American Psychological Association confirm that isolation can permanently damage the brain, especially when the confinement lasts longer than 30 days. And in many U.S. prisons, men and women spend months or even years in this state. But the environment is only one part of the reality. Overcrowding is another. America has one of the largest incarcerated populations in the world. In many facilities, 2 people are assigned to cells built for 1. 3 men sometimes share a single bunk and a floor mattress. With overcrowding comes stress, and with stress comes violence. In Georgia, officers report seeing homemade weapons nearly every day: sharpened toothbrushes, metal shanks, broken food trays, pieces of bed frames filed into blades. For inmates, these tools are not trophies. They're survival kits. When 40 men are crammed into a dorm built for 20 and guards are outnumbered 50 to 1, every conflict can escalate into something lethal. But violence isn't always physical. Psychological survival is just as critical. Many inmates come in with untreated mental health issues: schizophrenia, PTSD, bipolar disorder, addiction. Others develop those issues while inside. Some prisons have 1 psychologist for 300 inmates, making it nearly impossible to provide real help. The result is predictable: breakdowns, fights, self-harm, and long-term trauma that doesn't go away even after release. Yet beneath all of this darkness, there is a quieter truth. Nearly 95% of prisoners will one day re-enter society. The men pacing the isolation cells, the women struggling through mental health crises, the young offenders hardened by gang violence, they are all returning to streets, neighborhoods, and communities across America. And the question becomes, what kind of person leaves a place like this? Inside the system that never sleeps. The daily reality inside America's most dangerous prisons. It reveals the structure of America's hardest prisons. Chapter 2 pulls you directly into the daily routine, if you can call it that. Inside facilities known for extreme violence, overcrowding, and relentless tension, every moment comes with an unspoken rule: never let your guard down. At dawn, the prison wakes before the sun. Keys jingle down the corridor. Boots scrape across the concrete. Somewhere in the building, an inmate shouts at someone only he can see, a symptom of untreated mental illness. In another wing, metal bunks clang as correctional officers perform their first count of the day. Even the silence feels heavy. It's not peace, it's pressure. Breakfast trays roll in around 4 a.m., a tradition in many U.S. jails and prisons. Cold oatmeal, powdered eggs, maybe a slice of fruit. The sound of metal sliding through the food slot is the morning alarm. Half-asleep inmates grab their tray. Some eat. Others don't bother. For the officers, this is one of the most dangerous parts of the day. Tensions are high. Tempers ignite easily. One guard described breakfast as the hour when anger wakes up before the body does. Down in maximum security wings, some inmates are allowed out of their cells for 1 hour, a period known as rec time. In certain prisons, this yard is little more than a chain-link cage with a patch of sky visible above. For many, it's the only time they feel fresh air all day. In others, inmates aren't even allowed outdoors. Their recreation space is a small room with a treadmill bolted to the floor. One former inmate said, "You go months without feeling sunlight. You forget scents, the smell of grass, rain, dirt. Everything smells like concrete. Inside the cell blocks, overcrowding shapes everything. A cell designed for one man now holds 2 or 3. Someone sleeps on the floor next to the toilet. Someone else sleeps inches from the bars. Personal space becomes impossible. Privacy doesn't exist. Fights erupt over anything: food portions, noise, property, even the simple act of looking at someone too long. Correctional officers try to intervene, but with staff shortages affecting prisons across the country, they are often outnumbered. Some facilities operate at less than 50% staff capacity, creating an environment where officers can only react, not prevent. A former warden described this reality perfectly. In an overcrowded prison with too few officers, everyone becomes a victim: staff, inmates, and the system itself. Then there's the mental health crisis, the silent storm inside these walls. Nearly 40 to 50% of inmates in county jails suffer from some form of mental illness. Many are unmedicated. Some hear voices. Some pace nonstop. Some cry quietly into their blankets at night. Others lash out in unpredictable bursts of aggression that make them a danger to themselves and others. In one notorious segregation unit, a correctional officer recalled seeing inmates smear feces on their walls because they believed they were being monitored through the paint. Another inmate spent hours whispering to a vent he believed was an entrance to a secret tunnel. These scenes aren't exaggerations, they're documented realities across U.S. prisons. Meanwhile, drug trafficking remains a constant battle. Despite security, contraband slips through, smuggled by visitors, corrupt staff, or even through mail soaked in liquid narcotics. Drugs create survival hierarchies. Debts become violence. Alliances become weapons. But the pressure doesn't only crush inmates. Correctional officers, many making modest salaries, work grueling 12-hour shifts. Some face violent assaults, some suffer PTSD, and some don't return to work after witnessing traumatic incidents. Officers describe constant anxiety, hypervigilance, and the emotional toll of managing hundreds of offenders with minimal backup. One officer said, "You don't just do time on this side of the bars. You carry the job home. You hear the sounds when you sleep." Still, amid the brutality, there are small flashes of humanity. An officer teaching an inmate how to read during downtime. 2 cellmates sharing their last packet of ramen noodles. A man in solitary whispering a prayer for forgiveness. Someone fixing another inmate's broken radio in exchange for nothing. A guard slipping an extra carton of milk to a man who hasn't eaten in days. Moments like these don't erase the violence. But they remind you that even in the darkest corners of the system, there are human beings trying, despite everything, to hold on to something good. As the day winds down, the night shift takes over. The prison doesn't sleep. Someone cries in a distant cell. Someone screams through a door slot. Someone somewhere is sharpening a makeshift weapon against concrete. Officers patrol with flashlights, praying the next alarm won't be theirs. And inside every cell, every mind battles the same unbearable truth. Time doesn't just pass here. It crushes. What time does to a human beings. The long-term psychological and emotional toll inside America's hardest prisons. Time is the one thing every inmate has, yet the one thing none of them feel they truly own. In America's most dangerous prisons, time becomes its own form of punishment, silent, crushing, and merciless. Whether a person is inside for months, years, or decades, The effects of confinement begin shaping them long before they ever see a parole board or courtroom again. For many inmates, the journey begins with shock. Even for people who have seen violence on the streets, the soundscape inside a maximum security prison is different. The slamming metal doors, the echoing screams, the clatter of restraints, it's sensory overload. New inmates describe the first night as the longest of their lives, not because they fear the other prisoners but because they suddenly understand something deeper. Their past has ended. Their future is uncertain. And the present feels like a trap they cannot escape. That's when the psychological battle begins. In high-security facilities, isolation is common. Sometimes by choice for safety, sometimes as punishment, and sometimes simply due to overcrowding. A man might spend 22 to 23 hours a day alone, facing a concrete wall, with nothing but a mattress, a toilet, and his own thoughts. Research across multiple U.S. correctional systems has shown that prolonged isolation can lead to depression, paranoia, hallucinations, and a rapid deterioration of reality. One former inmate interviewed by human rights advocates described solitary confinement as a slow-motion drowning. "You don't die," he said, "but you stop living." Inmates often try to cope by creating routines. Push-ups, pacing, mental games, reciting old memories, or tapping Morse code messages to the person in the next cell. Some people write letters to family even if they never plan to send them. Others talk to themselves just to hear another human voice. But routines aren't enough to fight off what isolation eventually becomes, a force that reshapes the mind. Meanwhile, inmates who remain in general population face a different psychological pressure: constant alertness. There is no safe moment, no true relaxation, no opportunity to breathe freely without wondering who's watching. Guards call this hyper-awareness. Inmates call it survival. Men who have never been violent can become fighters simply because the environment demands it. In prison, vulnerability can be fatal, not always physically but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Weakness is exploited. Silence is questioned. Even kindness is viewed with suspicion. In one federal prison, an inmate spent nearly 2 years sleeping with his shoes on, convinced that a nighttime attack was inevitable. "If you fall asleep too deeply, you lose," he said. "You have to sleep ready." The mental strain doesn't just change the way inmates think, it changes who they are. Their voice hardens. Their posture changes. Their face becomes unreadable. Defense becomes identity. And once that transformation begins, reversing it becomes nearly impossible. Still, within these walls, some inmates try to hold on to their humanity. They join educational programs, participate in religious services, or mentor younger offenders. In some cases, the only sense of meaning they find is in a single photograph taped to the wall. A child's drawing, a picture of their mother, a memory of a life that now feels distant. Yet even hope becomes complicated. Letters from family slow down. Phone calls become shorter. Relationships crumble under the weight of time. Children grow up without their fathers. Parents pass away while their sons sit behind bars, unable to attend the funeral, unable to say goodbye. For many inmates, grief becomes a silent companion they carry like an additional sentence. But the psychological toll isn't limited to inmates. Correctional officers, often working understaffed, underpaid, and overwhelmed, experience their own trauma. Some witness stabbings or suicides they can never forget. Others carry guilt for not being able to stop violence or protect weaker inmates. A growing number of officers suffer from PTSD, anxiety, and depression. One officer admitted, "I went into this job thinking I was here to maintain order. After a few years, I realized I was just trying to survive the place same as them." It's a hidden truth. The environment breaks everyone, staff and inmates alike. Inside the hardest prisons, the line between guard and prisoner can feel thinner than anyone on the outside realizes. Both groups live under the same roof, breathe the same stale air, hear the same screams echo down the corridor. Both groups carry the same sense of threat. Both groups feel forgotten. And the system doesn't always help. Budget cuts, political debates, and lack of mental health resources leave prisons struggling to provide even basic care. In some states, only one psychologist may be assigned to hundreds of inmates. Waiting lists for treatment can stretch months or years. Medication delays or shortages only worsen the crisis. Meanwhile, violence continues because the system is not built to heal. It is built to contain. Still, amidst all this darkness, there are moments that reveal something powerful: the human spirit's refusal to fully collapse. A man in solitary begins teaching himself Spanish using nothing but an old dictionary. Another writes poetry on scraps of toilet paper. A lifer in a maximum security wing uses his limited phone minutes to tutor his teenage nephew from behind bars. A correctional officer quietly buys winter clothes for an inmate who owns nothing. A group of inmates starts an informal book club, passing torn novels from cell to cell. These moments don't fix the broken system, but they prove something essential. No matter how crushing the environment, people still search for meaning, even when the world tells them to stop. Toward the end of a long sentence, many inmates describe a strange emotional process. They've grown used to the noise, the routine, the fear, the structure. Their cell becomes familiar. Their identity becomes tied to survival. And yet, the idea of freedom, the one thing they should crave most, terrifies them. Re-entering society means facing everything the prison shielded them from: responsibility, bills, relationships, expectations, judgment, and the non-stop pace of modern life. Some men walk out of the gates feeling more afraid of freedom than they ever were of prison. Because freedom comes with choices, and choices require a sense of self. But after years inside, many no longer know who they are. This is the final impact of America's toughest prisons. The damage that can't be seen on security cameras or inmate files. The damage is internal, psychological, invisible, long-lasting. For some, prison becomes a place they never leave mentally, even after they've walked out the gates. And for others, time does more than pass. It reshapes the soul.